Vacation for the past week and a bit. Joy Reid and the whole staff here did a great job holding down the fort while I was gone, so I am very, very grateful to have had that time off. I am also happy to be back. Today is August 8th. On this date, 3 years ago, in 2014, a man named Michael Flynn was starting his new life as one of the highest profile firings of the Obama administration. Mike Flynn, of course, is now famous for having served very, very briefly as Trump's national security advisor, and also for being in the bullseye of the ongoing Trump-Russia investigation ever since. But being Trump's national security advisor was not the first high-profile Washington job that Mike Flynn had. He had been hired by the Obama administration to run the Defense Intelligence Agency. Now, it didn't work out. It didn't go well. In the end, he was perceived to have been a failure at that job. And by this week, in the summer of 2014, 3 years ago, he was gone. This was actually his first day after being fired 3 years ago today. Forced out well in advance of how long he'd been expected to stay. In that brief period, though, when Michael Flynn was running the Defense Intelligence Agency during the Obama administration, that agency did make really big news. It was news that seemed very alarming at the time. It set off days and arguably weeks of something approaching panic in the press and in national security circles. The reassuring news, looking back on it now, is that super scary news from Mike Flynn's Defense Intelligence Agency back in April 2013, when he was still running that agency, that scary news from him and his agency turned out to be wrong. It seemed very scary at the time, but it was wrong.
Today, in the midst of all this, we learned with many caveats what North Korea may be capable of. A member of Congress, for the first time in an open hearing, read a now unclassified study by our own Defense Intelligence Agency. They can now say with moderate confidence, quote, the North currently has nuclear weapons capable of delivering by ballistic missiles.
That was not news tape from today. That was from the spring of 2013, when the Defense Intelligence Agency under Mike Flynn set everybody's hair on fire. A Republican member of Congress, Doug Lamborn, read aloud a previously classified conclusion from the Defense Intelligence Agency, which was then headed by Mike Flynn. And that conclusion was that North Korea had achieved basically the Holy Grail in terms of its ability to threaten the continental United States. That DIA report back in 2013 said that the North Koreans had completed the process of miniaturizing a nuclear weapon so it could fit onto a ballistic missile. They could shoot it off anywhere in the world. And that set off a flurry of not quite panic, but something approaching that, until people realized, wait a second, maybe that's not true. At the time, the Director of National Intelligence had to come out and say, yes, this may be what Mike Flynn and his Defense Intelligence Agency have concluded, but according to the DNI, quote, it is not the consensus of the nation's intelligence community. The Director of National Intelligence at the time had to put out a written statement explaining that Mike Flynn and DIA, they were alone on this. And furthermore, they were wrong on this. They put out a written statement from the Director of National Intelligence Office saying, quote, North Korea has not yet demonstrated the full range of capabilities necessary for a nuclear-armed missile. So everybody freaked out, and then they were like, maybe not. And then things calmed down even further when the South Koreans came out, and they also threw cold water on what Mike Flynn and his agency had reported back in the spring of 2013. I mean, South Koreans are probably in a position to know, right, given their acute interest in the matter, given their proximity to the problem at hand. South Korean Defense Ministry came out at the time and said, yeah, no. Quote, we have no doubt, we have doubt that North Korea has reached the stage of miniaturization. So that story in 2013 started off as a worry about North Korea story. It ended up being a worry about our Defense Intelligence Agency story. And the Defense Intelligence Agency, it was not just a Mike Flynn thing. They already had a difficult reputation on matters like this. You might remember that that was the agency that argued vociferously, more than any other intelligence agency, that Iraq had nuclear weapons. before the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. Of course, at the time, not only did Iraq not have nuclear weapons, they didn't even have a nuclear program. But DIA insisted they had. DIA had been wrong about that 10 years earlier, ahead of the Iraq War. They were wrong about North Korea miniaturizing the nukes thing 10 years later, in 2013. And not long thereafter, the head of the DIA, Mike Flynn, found himself out on his ear, one of the highest profile firings of the entire Obama administration. Well, now it's August 2017, and the Washington Post has just published what looks like basically a carbon copy of that screwed up story from Mike Flynn's agency 4 years ago. Citing a, quote, new analysis completed last month by the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Post reports that DIA's confidential assessment is that North Korea has successfully produced a miniaturized warhead that can fit inside its missiles. This seems like the exact same thing we went through in 2013, minus the Mike Flynn, right? It's the same intelligence agency, it's DIA. And again, like we had in 2013, again, we've got some indications from sources elsewhere in the intelligence world that maybe this is just DIA, maybe this is not everybody. One U.S. official telling CNN tonight that, quote, this is not a consensus view from the entire intelligence community. So if you're feeling like you've heard this story before today, and if you have experienced this freak out before and it turned out not to be true, you're remembering that right. There are lots of reasons to be skeptical here. We have heard this story before when it turned out not to be the case. But last time, in 2013, the South Korean Defense Ministry came out and said, no, we don't think this is true. This time, we're not hearing any words of caution from credible foreign intelligence agencies like that. This time, to the contrary, the Defense Ministry in Japan just today published a white paper saying, actually, this could be true. Japan's defense ministry said today, quote, it is possible that North Korea has achieved the miniaturization of nuclear weapons. So, I mean, we have heard this story before, and it wasn't true the first time we heard it. But this time, there isn't anybody shooting it down aggressively like there was in 2013. And this year, there is some soft or at least potential corroboration from Japan, which, like South Korea, would sort of be in a position to know. I mean, this also comes at a time when we're getting used to undisputed reports, proof from North Korea that they are making significant progress on other aspects of their offensive capability. They've set off a series of missile tests in the last few months that have shown genuine advancement in terms of how far out into the world they can project force. In mid-May, they shot a missile basically straight up into the air that went about 1,200 miles. U.S. analysts concluded at the time that had the North Koreans aimed that missile at more of an angle, it might conceivably have thrown as far as 3,000 miles. And that kind of just sounds like an SAT level math problem, right? You've got the propulsion and the distance and the angle, and if you change the angle, how far does it, right? Kind of just sounds like a math problem. But when Reuters reported this evening that North Korean state media tonight is broadcasting musings from that government that they might launch a strike at Guam, well, that 3,000-mile math problem becomes a very relevant thing because Guam is under 3,000 miles from North Korea. It's just over 2,000 miles from North Korea. And if North Korea really can provably shoot missiles that far, that means that the answer to that math problem, if it's true, means that Guam is within their reach. Not with some weapon they might develop in the future, or that we might have intelligence fights about how soon they're going to develop it in the future, but with a weapon that they have now, that they have demonstrated now. Now, have they reached a point where they can shrink one of their nuclear warheads and fix it to one of those missiles? I don't know. None of us do. We also do not know if they have the capacity with any of their missiles to survive re-entry from the upper atmosphere, which is the height that an ICBM reaches during its flight. If they can build that kind of missile and they can shrink the nuclear warhead to fit it onto a missile like that, we still don't know if they can do all those things at once. Right? You can get granular about this, right? The threat that the United States is most afraid of in terms of North Korea's ability to hit the mainland United States would require them to do a whole bunch of things that we don't know if they could do. It would require them to shrink their nuclear warhead, to mount it to a working ICBM, to be able to successfully launch and then control that ICBM so it can actually hit its target. That missile also has to be able to survive re-entry into the atmosphere with its warhead intact. And they need to be able to do all of those things all at once with the same piece of technology and avoid us shooting it down. And obviously, there is great interest in our country in knowing whether or not they can do that now, or how soon they might be able to do all of that if that's what they're trying for. But we have had relatively recent experience of spending days and weeks and even months in this country freaking out over U.S. intelligence reports on that capacity that turned out first to be contested and then not to be true. And the reason our intelligence about them is often such a mess is because even more than most despotic countries, they are incredibly opaque. They're called the Hermit Kingdom for a reason, right? They are a mystery to us not just because of their deliberate secrecy, but also because they seem so nuts to us on a diplomatic level. And presumably that is on purpose. They don't want to be seen as a normal, predictable, rational country, and they deliberately don't behave as one. I mean, there's a reason that they don't just engage in the kinds of threats that normal countries issue to each other. They threatened to turn, an island off the coast of South Korea into a nuclear sea of fire. Remember when that comedy came out, that movie, The Interview, that made a joke out of a secret American plot to kill Kim Jong-un? North Korea called that the most blatant act of terrorism and war. They said it was reckless U.S. provocative insanity. They said that movie triggered a gust of hatred and rage among the North Korean people. They threatened merciless countermeasures against the movie. They've also said that the United States looks like a boiled pumpkin. They say John Kerry has a hideous lantern jaw. They used all sorts of racist terms to talk about President Obama, and they generally have become famous for making threats like crazy people make threats. Right? This was just this week. They should be mindful, this is about us, they should be mindful that the DPRK strategic steps accompanied by physical action will be taken mercilessly with the mobilization of all its national strength. Packs of wolves are coming in to strangle a nation. That was this week. What does that even mean? I mean, there's so many scary things about wolves, but like wolves strangling people? You can understand, like, wolves are going to come in and bite your face or like steal your baby or something. But wolves coming in and strangling you? Wolves don't even have hands. Like, the one thing you don't have to worry about them is their hensile grip. It's like saying you're going to stab somebody in their sense of humor. I mean, it doesn't make... Wolf paws can scratch you, but they can't grab like a piano wire. It doesn't even... They're not even literal. But that kind of nutty, over-the-top, laugh-out-loud, mixed metaphor threatening, that is something they have been doing for years. We're sort of acclimated to it. You can make funny, comedic movies about it, right? And the world is kind of acclimated to that, too. What the world has not acclimated to is an American president doing his version of the same thing.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. He has been very threatening beyond a normal statement. And as I said, they will be met with fire, fury, and frankly, power, the likes of which this world has never seen before. Thank you.
No, thank you. I mean, as a world, we're not happy about it, but we're used to North Korea threatening to turn things into a sea of fire. We're not used to that from an American president, from any American president. So this, as the new variable in what is already an insane relationship, this is genuinely new. As is the just wild incoherence of the administration beyond the president in terms of how they're handling this ongoing big problem, this international threat. I mean, 2.5 weeks ago, Trump's CIA director, Mike Pompeo, said at a security forum that basically, yes, the United States wants regime change in North Korea. Then last week, Trump's Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, said the United States definitely does not want regime change in North Korea. That said, later in the week, Rex Tillerson said the U.S. would agree to talk with the North Koreans, provided that the North Koreans agreed the end results of the talks would be them giving up their nuclear program. That was him last week. Now, Rex Tillerson, same guy, has a whole different set of standards they would have to reach in order to get talks with the United States. Now, he's changed his mind on that as well. Now he says he would talk with the North Koreans just as long as they stop doing their missile tests. That's all they need to do. Meanwhile, Vice President Mike Pence is busy saying there never will be any talks with North Korea. We won't talk with them on any terms. And then the president, depending on the day, says that Kim Jong-un is a smart cookie and he'd be honored to meet with him. And also the United States is prepared to rain down fury and fire and power like the world has never seen. And also we'll strangle you with our wolf paws. Oh no, that was the other guy. Remember when Trump said he was sending an armada to North Korea when there were no ships sailing to North Korea at all? North Korea popping off official statements that threaten nuclear annihilation is something we have acclimated to as a country and as a world. The American president making the same kind of threats is a new thing that we don't really understand the risk of yet. We don't know if he means it. We don't know if North Korea will believe that he means it. We don't know if this was a planned statement by the administration where the national security consequences of this threat from the president have been gamed out and anticipated, and it's part of a strategy. Or maybe this was just something he felt like saying. Remember when Mike Flynn was National Security Advisor? He came out in the briefing room and said, Iran, you're on notice. Nobody had any idea what that meant. It was completely dislocated from everything else the administration was doing with regard to Iran. Turned out it meant nothing. And 2 weeks later, Mike Flynn was gone. Poof. Is that what's going on here with these new, totally unprecedented threats to North Korea? Or is this part of a plan? Where would we look for planning evidence if it is a plan? How about the National Enquirer? That's often a surprisingly blunt translation of how the president would like the world to see him. Have you been looking at their cover since he was inaugurated? It is a bizarre thing, but if you're looking for somewhere to strike your tuning fork, there really is this supermarket tabloid that shows you, more often than not, exactly the way that Trump would like to be seen. I mean, this is what they look. This is what the National Enquirer looks like now. Trump takes charge. Success in just 36 days. President Trump tell-all, how I'm cleaning up Obama's mess. Since the election, mixed in with all this Fox and Friends style stuff, they repeatedly keep going back to Trump declaring war on dictators. Right? There's Kim Jong-un, the cover of the National Enquirer. What did Trump talk about at his secret summit with Vladimir Putin that only the National Enquirer is reporting on? Apparently, he talked about his plan to overthrow the dictator in North Korea. This was a recent one. Nope, wrong. We have the other headline there. We have a one from last. We don't have last. It's one we have it. We'll post it later. From last month, there was the cover said that said under siege, made it look like Trump is under siege, but in the small print, there we go. The ones under siege are the North Koreans with ICBMs aimed at America's West Coast. Our president refuses to blink. He's outfoxing the North Korean dictator. How he will solve the missile crisis, just like JFK. I mean, where do you look to figure out if what the president just did is part of a plan? Is just an aberration, something he had a feeling to say in the moment, or something that is actually part of the way he sees his presidency as going? We have no idea what's actually going on inside the president's head. And we don't know whether it's just inside his head alone or if it's a plan of his administration. But we've really never had an American president playing I'm rubber, you're glue with the North Koreans in terms of their threats for nuclear holocaust before. And so there is a brand new, totally unprecedented craziness and surrealism problem in the U.S.-North Korean relationship that for the first time includes our own government. And you can take that separate and apart from the truly unanswered, contested questions as to whether or not North Korea has got nuclear-tipped ICBMs that could hit the mainland United States. I mean, it's worth asking for second, third, fourth sources on intelligence like that because that has been such contested intelligence in the past. But you know what? Even if that new intelligence being reported today, even if it turns out not to be true in terms of whether or not they've already miniaturized nuclear weapons, we know for sure that they've got artillery and short-range and medium-range missiles that are well-developed, that could easily devastate South Korea and Japan. We know they've got major stocks of chemical and biological weapons. You remember the assassination of Kim Jong-un's half-brother at that airport a couple of months ago. They carried out that assassination using VX. They could have just shot the guy or knifed him, but no, they wanted to show they could do it with a nerve agent. They are a chemical and biological weapons known power. They could put nerve agent onto some of the weapons we know for sure they've got. If they were able to successfully hit a city like Tokyo, right, that means they'd be hitting a population center of over 30 million people. Tokyo's metro area has a population that's like akin to California's. North Korea first tested a nuclear weapon in 2006. We know they've got some nuclear capacity. There's definitely intrigue and mystery as to the full extent of their nuclear capability. The number of their weapons, how advanced those weapons are, how they could be delivered. But separate and apart from that, the radical confusion and lying and internal contradiction and threats from our new government, from our new administration, that is really the new element here. That is the new variable here that we have no idea how it's going to affect us. Regardless of the extent of their nuclear capability, newly called into question today, what our new administration is doing with this new, maybe strategic, maybe off-the-handle attack on North Korea, this rhetorical attack from the president of North Korea, the only thing we know about it for sure is that they are playing with absolutely untheoretical fire by advancing the conflict in this way.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe.
I'm feeling selfish, baby, losing my mind. This drink in my cup ain't doing me right, 'cause I'm feeling like I'm sipping on time. Without you, baby, my steps ain't right. My words are twisted and my songs are blank lines. I ain't been faded, but my head keeps spinning around. I'm looking for you, girl, 'cause I can't do it myself. Without you, baby. Without you, baby. Let's go down, baby. This is part 2, when I'm without you. One blink of the eye, lost sight of you. You got me saying, you got me saying, saw you for the second time, blew my mind. Play it back, girl, rewind. Without you, girl, I don't know what I do. KBH on the remix, part 2. I can be your morphine, take away the pain. Be a Superman, yeah, save you from the lanes. You're my Wonder Woman, girl, you got me on your rope. Hope you never, never let me go. I'm just trying to let you know the way you make me feel, Mr. Incredible. Search you out like yoga, my elastic girl. Got my heart, I'm drowning in your love. You're my oxygen, can't never get enough. All the small things I would do for you. Back flips, front flips, 182. In the blink of an eye, lose sight of you. Life isn't worth living if it's without you. Let's go down, baby. This is part 2, when I'm without you. One blink of the eye, lost sight of you. You got me saying, you got me saying, yo, she stepped into the club and she wants a coat check. High heel strap and the body on check. Something like a Maserati when she walk by. Keeping at a distance cause shot is too fly. Cause the roof's on fire, she only getting higher. Lust is required, let me give you your desire. The vision of your beauty just stuck in my dome. Try to let me in like an invitation to your home. Without you, baby, we don't make one. Cause you like my bullet and my loaded gun. Blood drunk, got me so sprung. Hanging on tight like I'm on the run. Like the mafia, you made me who I am. I made man, but before I met you, I was acting like a good 10. Without you, it's like I'm locked in the pen. Do the night then, again and again. Let's go down, baby. This is part 2, when I'm without you. One blink of the eye, lost sight of you. You got me saying, you got me saying, you got me yo, I'm getting a little closer. I'm one step away from this point to approach her. I'm fighting for her love in this war, I'm a soldier. Bang, bang, game not giving up on the girl that I love. I will take the fall when push comes to shove. I can see the future when I look into her eyes. Memories fly by like days of our lives. Girl, I miss you, and I want you, and my conscience says that I need you. The only letters I can say is why I owe you. Girl, you kept the heart beating, this is why I owe you. Got me chopped, then screwed. I swear to God that I'm tripping. Without you, girl, I got insomnia. I can't sleep 'cause my